My father sold our entire family business for $85 million, and didn't give his children a single cent. That's the moment the room went silent. No clinking silverware, no small talk, just the weight of his words hanging over the dinner table like a storm cloud ready to break. We were sitting in the grand dining room of the Carter Heritage Inn, the same place we'd celebrated birthdays, weddings, and every major family milestone. Only this time, there was no celebration, just a decision that would change everything we thought we knew about loyalty, legacy, and each other. I was the quiet one in the family, the one they thought didn't care about the hotel business. What they didn't know was that for the past 10 years, I'd been playing a very different game, one they were about to lose without even realizing it had begun. Stay with me, because the secret I revealed that night didn't just shock my family, it flipped our entire world upside down. And if you want more stories where the truth hits harder than the betrayal, make sure to subscribe to ErasedMe. Some stories are too good to stay buried. The silverware clinked too softly that night. It was my father's birthday, yet every smile around the table felt rehearsed, like we were all reading from a script no one had agreed to. And in the middle of it all, Dad's eyes kept drifting, not to his cake, not to the gifts, but to me. The dining room of Carter Heritage Inn had always been a stage for family moments, golden chandeliers spilling warm light over polished mahogany, the faint scent of cedar from the old beams, the muffled hum of guests in the lobby below. But that night, beneath the laughter and toasts, something sharp hit in the air, an unspoken tension that wrapped around my ribs. I kept watching his hands. My father never fidgeted, yet tonight he traced the rim of his wine glass like it was a countdown clock. Daniel, my older brother, was telling a story about a high-profile case he'd won. Melissa, my younger sister, scrolled through her phone between bites, showing Dad photos from her latest trip to Portugal. I stirred my soup, barely tasting it. This wasn't just a birthday dinner. I could feel it in the way Mom avoided my eyes, in the way the waitstaff lingered near the door as if expecting a cue. When the main course was served, Dad set down his fork, straightened in his chair, and cleared his throat. The room quieted instantly. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice steady but his gaze unreadable. "I've made a decision about the Carter Heritage Inns, one that will change this family forever." I froze, my spoon hovering midair. In that moment, I knew, this wasn't going to be the kind of news anyone could toast to. Daniel reacted first. His chair creaked as he leaned forward, voice sharp. "What do you mean, change the family forever?" Melissa laughed, too loudly, too quickly, like if she kept it light, the weight in Dad's tone might disappear. "You're not retiring, are you?" she teased, but her fingers tapped the stem of her glass in a jittery rhythm. I said nothing. Silence was safer. It let me watch. Dad's gaze moved between us like a man choosing where to drop a match. I caught the faintest shift in Mom's posture, shoulders stiff, eyes locked on her plate. The way she pushed peas around with her fork reminded me of the night she told us about Grandpa's will, the one that tore our extended family apart. A gust of wind rattled the old windows, making the chandelier sway just enough to scatter light across the table. For a second, everyone's face looked wrong. Shadows in the wrong places. Smiles pulled too tight. Daniel pressed again. "If this is about the inns, we have a right to know." "Rights," Dad repeated quietly, almost to himself, before looking up with an expression I'd never seen, cold, deliberate. "I've decided to sell Carter Heritage Inns." Melissa's smile vanished. Daniel's jaw tensed. Somewhere in the lobby below, a bell chimed, a new guest arriving. The sound felt out of place, like background noise in a nightmare. And for the first time all night, I realized the unease in my chest wasn't about what Dad was saying. It was about the feeling that whatever was coming next, I already knew it wouldn't be fair. Daniel's voice cut through the silence. "You're selling? To who?" Dad didn't answer right away. Instead, he laid his napkin flat on the table like he was smoothing out his thoughts. "I'm 72, he began, his tone almost tender. "Your mother and I have spent our lives building the Carter Heritage Inns from nothing. Long nights, missed vacations. Every risk you can imagine. And now, we want to enjoy what's left of our time without the weight of payrolls and renovations hanging over us. Melissa leaned in, her voice soft. So you're passing it down? Letting us take over? Dad's eyes hardened. No. Neither of you has shown any real interest in running these hotels. You've built lives elsewhere. Daniel, you're in courtrooms. Melissa, you're on airplanes. Neither of you has walked the floors with me at 2 a.m. when a boiler broke or when a wedding nearly fell apart because the chef quit mid-reception. The words stung, but not because they weren't true, because they were. I'd heard this speech in pieces over the years, always aimed at someone else. He leaned back. I won't watch 30 years of work be treated like a bank account you can dip into. I'd rather sell to someone who values it. Daniel's fists clenched under the table. Melissa's lips trembled, caught between protest and guilt. I kept my eyes on Dad, searching for any sign that this was a bluff. But there was only resolve. Finally, I asked, and what about me? He looked almost startled, as if he'd forgotten I was there. Evelyn, you've been in finance for so long, I doubt you'd want to be tangled in hospitality. That was when the thought hit me, sharp, electric. He really has no idea who I am anymore. The rest of the table blurred, voices, clinking glasses, the faint murmur of the lobby below. All I could hear was the echo of his words. I doubt you'd want to be tangled in hospitality. It wasn't just dismissal. It was erasure. I'd spent years swallowing moments like this, family dinners where my work was reduced to Evelyn plays with numbers, holidays where Daniel's cases and Melissa's travels stole the spotlight while I sat quietly, my own successes treated like polite small talk. I remembered one Christmas, years ago, when I'd offered to help Dad review the hotel's financial reports. He'd laughed. Not unkindly, but in that way that shuts a door you didn't realize you were standing in front of. Leave the boring stuff to me, kiddo. That night, I'd stayed up in my apartment, running the numbers anyway. And somewhere between the spreadsheets and the late-night coffee, a quiet decision rooted itself. I would learn everything, finance, operations, acquisitions, not to ask for a place at this table, but to build my own. Now, as I sat across from him, it hit me how far that seed had grown. My father thought I'd chosen a life away from the Carter Heritage Inns. The truth was, I'd been preparing for this world all along, just not in the way he could see. And if he couldn't see me, maybe it was time to make sure he couldn't ignore me either. Dad took a slow sip of water before speaking again, as if the weight of the words needed bracing. The Carter Heritage Inns will be sold to a hospitality group in New York, Sterling Hospitality. They've made an offer I can't refuse. Daniel's brow furrowed. Sterling? Never heard of them. Are they even reputable? They are, Dad said firmly. They've promised to keep the Carter name and take care of the staff. $85 million, in cash and secured financing. Melissa's jaw dropped. 85 million? That's incredible. The room buzzed with their reactions, but for me, time slowed. I'd built Sterling Hospitality from a single boutique hotel in Boston into a network spanning 6 states. I'd sat through every late-night negotiation, every acquisition meeting, every setback that nearly broke me. And yet, here I was, watching my family talk about Sterling like it was some distant stranger. I set down my glass, my fingers steady even as my pulse roared in my ears. Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, do you know who owns Sterling Hospitality? He blinked, caught off guard. Private company. Investors in Manhattan. Why? I leaned forward, letting the silence stretch until even the chandelier seemed to hum. I own it. Melissa laughed, thinking it was a joke. Daniel just stared. I founded Sterling Hospitality. Every offer, every contract, every promise you've heard, it's mine. The air fractured. Dad's face went pale, his mouth parting like he'd lost his place in the script. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the daughter at the edge of the table. I was the one holding it together, or flipping it over. No one spoke. The clink of cutlery from another table in the dining room felt like it was happening miles away. Melissa's laughter died first. She stared at me, blinking, like if she gave me enough time I'd take it back. Daniel's expression was harder, lawyer hard. A quick assessment, a mental cross-examination, as if he could find the loophole that made my words untrue. Dad was the last to react. His hands, always steady, curled slightly against the linen tablecloth. "You," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Evelyn, you?" "Yes," I said, holding his gaze. "I founded Sterling Hospitality. I made the offer. And I've been preparing for this acquisition for the last 2 years." It wasn't triumph I felt in that moment, it was a kind of stillness. The kind you get right before a storm when the air turns heavy and you can smell rain that hasn't fallen yet. Melissa shook her head. "You work in finance. You crunch numbers. You don't run hotels." "That's what you all chose to believe," I replied quietly. "Because it was easier than asking questions you didn't want the answers to." Dad leaned back, studying me as though he were seeing me for the first time, not as his youngest daughter, but as someone who had moved entirely beyond his narrative of the family. I couldn't read his eyes. Was it betrayal? Pride? Both? "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why hide it from us?" I wanted to tell him everything, that every dismissal, every laugh at my expense, had been fuel. That every deal Sterling made carried the shadow of my family's doubt. But the truth caught in my throat. "Because I wanted to earn this," I said instead. "And you don't get to earn something if it's handed to you out of loyalty or pity." Silence again. Heavy. This time, no one looked away. The space between us felt like a canyon, too wide to cross in one step, yet carved entirely by years of words unsaid. And sitting there, I realized something that twisted deeper than any business deal ever could. In their eyes, I just stopped being family, and started being the person who'd taken the family away. I don't remember who looked away first, my father, my siblings, or me. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. The stillness I'd been holding on to all night began to crack, not with rage, but with a steady, deliberate certainty. They didn't know my story. Not really. I'd left Boston at 28 with 2 suitcases, a spreadsheet of properties no one else wanted, and a loan I wasn't sure I could pay back. Sterling Hospitality was never about glamour, it was about finding opportunity in the neglected corners of the market. A failing Victorian inn in Vermont, a boarded-up lakeside lodge in Maine. I didn't buy them to flip for a quick profit. I rebuilt them. I learned every nail, every payroll cycle, every supplier who could make or break a season. I kept my name out of it on purpose. Publicly, I was just E. Carter in the investor filings. Privately, I was everywhere. On construction sites in steel-toe boots, in kitchens at midnight talking menus with chefs, in empty lobbies at dawn smelling fresh paint before the first guests arrived. 2 years ago, I started watching the Carter Heritage Inns like an architect studying an old building, looking for the stress fractures, the untapped spaces. Every quarterly report, every customer review, every rumor of Dad considering retirement. I collected them. And in a folder I'd kept locked in my home office, there was proof that Sterling's offer wasn't just generous, it was the lifeline the business needed. Deferred maintenance, outdated booking systems, rising competition from boutique chains. Dad had been too close to see it all clearly. I glanced at him across the table now. He still looked like a man betrayed. But in time, I'd show him that betrayal wasn't the point. Legacy was. Because this wasn't just about taking over. It was about preserving what he'd built. By making it stronger than he ever thought possible. And whether they liked it or not, the next move was mine. For the rest of the dinner, no one touched dessert. The chocolate torte sat untouched in the center of the table, like a peace offering no one trusted. I let the silence stretch, filling it with my own quiet calculations. Every name in my contact list, every document in that locked folder back home, every note I'd taken in the margins of contracts my family never saw, It was all lining up now. Daniel finally broke. So, what happens to us? It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I leaned back, folding my hands. If you want to be part of this, there's a path. But it's not the one you've been imagining. Melissa raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning you start at the bottom. Project coordinator. Front desk. Guest services. You work the hours. You learn the systems. You earn your way in, like I did. Daniel scoffed. You expect me to check in guests? I expect you to prove you can build something, not just inherit it, I said, my voice even. In my head, it was already a chess match, one where I'd set the board years ago. They thought this was about punishing them. It wasn't. It was about testing them. And if they failed? Well, legacies had been rebuilt from less. Dad studied me across the table, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. I couldn't tell if it was disapproval or the first glint of respect. Either way, the game had begun. The next morning, I arrived at the Boston headquarters of Sterling before the sun had cleared the harbor. The glass facade reflected the pale winter light, making the building look like it was holding its breath. Daniel was already waiting in the lobby, still in his tailored suit but without the usual courtroom swagger. Melissa came in minutes later, travel mug in hand, her hair pulled back like she was ready to work, though her eyes told me she wasn't sure what that meant yet. I didn't greet them with speeches. I handed each of them a folder. Inside were the current performance reports of the Carter Heritage Inns, maintenance backlogs, outdated reservation software, occupancy rate projections. No drama, just numbers. Numbers that told the truth better than I ever could. Daniel flipped through his, the sound of paper against paper loud in the quiet lobby. Melissa read hers slower, her brow furrowing with each page. This, Daniel began, then stopped, glancing at me. You've been tracking all of this? For years, I said simply. We rode the elevator together to the 14th floor, the hum of the machinery the only sound. When the doors opened, the Sterling operations floor stretched before us, phones ringing, managers walking with purpose, screens alive with live booking stats from 6 states. I watched their faces as they stepped in. It was like showing someone the ocean for the first time, vast, humbling, impossible to ignore. No one spoke. But in that silence, I felt the first crack in their resistance. Some battles aren't won with shouting. Sometimes you win by quietly showing the truth, and letting it do the work for you. 6 months later, we stood together on the terrace of the flagship Carter Heritage Inn in Boston. The winter chill had faded into spring, and the harbor below shimmered in the late afternoon sun. Daniel now wore a name badge that read Project Coordinator, a role he once scoffed at, but now carried with quiet pride. Melissa had just finished designing the new branding for our Charleston property, her hands moving with ease through the details she'd once ignored. Dad was there too, leaning on the railing beside me. He didn't talk about betrayal anymore. He talked about bookings, expansion, the staff he still visited like old friends. Retirement had turned out not to be an ending for him, but a different kind of stewardship. We hadn't erased the past. There were still moments when the air felt heavy with what we'd all said, or hadn't said, at that dinner. But there was also something else now, a shared stake in what came next. As the evening crowd began to gather in the lobby for the anniversary gala, I caught my father watching me. Not with suspicion, not even with surprise, just recognition. The look of a man who finally saw me as more than his youngest daughter. I was wrong, he said quietly. About you. I smiled. No, Dad. You just didn't have the whole picture yet. We went inside together, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter washing over us. Some legacies are inherited. Others are built. The best ones are made together, brick by brick, choice by choice, until they belong to everyone who's willing to carry their weight. And sometimes, the only way to protect what's yours, is to be willing to rebuild it from the ground up. In the end, it was never just about the hotels. It wasn't even about the $85 million or the contracts signed in glass-walled boardrooms. It was about the quiet truth that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Success isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn, piece by piece, choice by choice. For a long time, I thought proving myself meant building something entirely on my own, far away from my family's shadow. And maybe, in part, it did. But what I've learned is that independence and connection aren't enemies. You can stand on your own and still stand together, if everyone is willing to do the work. My father taught me grit without realizing it. My siblings taught me resilience by doubting me. And I taught myself that sometimes, the best way to honor a legacy is to challenge it. We didn't rewrite the past. We built on top of it, the way you'd restore an old inn, preserving the beams that still hold strong, replacing the ones that can't bear the weight anymore. Now, when I walk the halls of the Carter Heritage Inns, I see more than a business. I see proof that second chances aren't given, they're taken, shaped, and earned. And maybe that's the real inheritance, the chance to create something worth passing on, not because you have to, but because you want to. Because in the end, legacies don't live in buildings or bank accounts. They live in the hands willing to keep building.